The Fantasmagorium show is proud to present Ghouls, Ghosts, and Goblins. Largely regarded as the studio that began Hollywood's love affair with the horror genre, Universal Pictures produced the films of the first monster movies. Released in 1932, starring Boris Karloff as the titular Egyptian, tonight we are pondering The Mummy. I am Scotty R37. Kat is here. Senor Mamia is joining us in Egypt. And Steve is watching from a smoky pool. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Anaxanamun. And Emotep. Yeah, this is rad. This is the first time that I've ever actually seen it. Watched it about an hour ago. I love these Universal monster movies just because they're basically an hour and 15 and done. Very brevity was the soul of these films when they were released. And I was pleasantly surprised. It's definitely more atmospheric than scary. And I can see how the audiences at the time would be off-put by some of the cinematographic choices. But what were your guys' impressions?
This one, I don't think really is a horror movie. It's like a romance. And it has some of the iconic Egyptian imagery and stuff like that. But it's not really a monster movie per se. Emotep is, the monster, but it's not in the same vein of Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Black Lagoon, or any of those. Or Invisible Man.
I was actually kind of shocked by some of the violence because there is a guy that gets run through with a spear.
Oh yeah, and the flashback scenes. Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, that is pretty gnarly for 1932.
Yahweh ganding dunaraxunamu.
All right.
Ulayukan lexi dame baak. Beha prasim ayu godem. Bah.
Is there going to be a translation?
Nope. But I do agree with my colleague Bastet over here that it really is a love story through and through, especially when you get to the third act in the museum with Emotep and, his lover to be.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And there are a couple of deaths. And in terms of the unnerving nature of it, when they do have they hold on a shot and whenever Emotep is using his powers and his eyes sort of start to glow or the light hits it in that way, I can imagine being sort of taken aback by almost breaking the fourth wall and the mummy sort of casting a spell over the audience. It would be unsettling.
I agree, especially the first time you see that close-up shot of Boris Karloff when the father is pretty much threatening him, I could choke you and tear apart your dry organs with my bare hands. And then it's like a quick cut of a full facial frontal of Emotep. And that's like a blink and you'll miss a moment. And he's just like, yeah, fucking try it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and yeah, he absolutely. And he's like, but your powers are too strong. And eventually, he's reaching out because he has the cursed powers. And so he's crushing people's hearts and their chests, essentially.
Yeah.
It's funny that he was willing also to be merciful when, Doctor gets in his face and he's like, like you mentioned, he backs away saying, oh, your powers are too strong. But you think Emotep would just drop him right there. But no, he initially respects that. He's like, okay, I don't need to kill you right now. But of course, when he tries to go over his head again.
Yeah. That stare down was pretty much a warning. It's like, this is me being reasonable. Back away and let me do what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Bitch, please. But it is, and this is actually based upon the opening of Tut's tomb. It wasn't the first two. We haven't covered Frankenstein yet. But Frankenstein obviously based upon a book, Dracula based upon a book. This was actually just based on the real events of opening the tomb and the curse and everything like that. And so a lot of this comes from actual archaeological science, if you will, maybe loose use of that science.
Well, yeah, because you have the one character, the actual archaeologist, Joseph Wemple, who's He's like, there's more to be discovered in examining these little pieces of pottery than the sensational finds inside the tombs. And then you have his friend and colleague, Dr. Muller, once again played by Edward Van Sloan, who, of course, played Van Helsing in the last Dracula film we reviewed. Mm-hmm. And he's a bit more superstitious and believes in the curse and stuff like that. And he makes note when they've already removed the sarcophagus from whatever tomb it came from, because it's inside their little main office that they've kind of they're using like the annex of one of the chambers there, and they have a sign which is kind of funny. It says, British Museum Expedition season, and the year just changes each year that they're there, which is kind of funny. And the tomb is already there, and the doctor's like examining it, and he sees that, hey, this guy's organs weren't removed. That's not customary. And oh, there looks to be scratch marks on here. This guy might have been buried alive. Oh, we shouldn't be touching this. There's something weird about it. Whereas the archaeologist is like, nonsense. It's just science that doesn't really matter. And the hapless assistant is also, not really concerned about it. And so when the others leave, he opens the scroll, and that's where you have the bit of the scroll of Thoth, which is, of course, based on the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And despite the fact that there is nothing in ancient Egyptian lore about mummies actually being reanimated and going after people or anything, that's kind of what they do with this movie. And so once this idiot reads the scroll, you have this iconic image, courtesy of Alex Ross, who painted this for this neat steelbook cover. As you see the mummy Imhotep, the high priest, exiting his sarcophagus and marching off into the desert. And it's like, the archaeologist comes and sees the aftermath of this, and I guess he just assumes it was a theft. He confirms later in the movie he thought it was a theft. And we find out that the hapless assistant went mad and went to an asylum and died in laughing fits. Which, strangely, the archaeologist is not suspicious of. It's like, if this is just a simple robbery, why are you not wondering what happened to the assistant? And it's like, they just kind of leave it at that. And there's an interesting, 10-year time jump where we don't see the process of how Imhotep, like, does he just magically transform to look like a human, or does he actually go out and, target people like you see in all the horror movies of the other trilogy that Universal did from 1940 through 44, The Mummy's Hand, The Mummy's Tomb, and The Mummy's Ghost. And then later the Hammer films of the 1959 and beyond. Those are always the ones where the mummy's, wandering around in bandages and going after people who raided his tomb to try and bring himself back to life. As well as borrowing elements of this where he's trying to resurrect his love, or, believes that his love has been reincarnated in the female lead. But this one doesn't do that. Like, they skip any type of horror elements of that and just do a 10-year time jump where Imhotep is now going by the name Ardeth Bey, which I see those of you in the chat saying you've only seen the Brendan Fraser ones or only familiar with those. And of course, in those movies, Ardeth Bey was one of the guardians of Imhotep's tomb. In this movie, Ardeth Bey is the name that Imhotep takes for himself when he returns a decade later as this eccentric Egyptian guy who leads the British expedition to Princess Anaxunamun's grave or tomb, so they can raid it and bring it all to the museum. And it's like, okay, this is kind of interesting, the direction that the story's going, because it's not really doing a horror type thing. And it has elements of, like, the drawing room story, like you had with Dracula, a lot of stuff going on inside the house of, what was it, Wempel's house, where you have the girl who's supposed to be half Egyptian, but it's like, okay.
Yeah.
and she's, interestingly, throughout the movie.
White, we'll go with it.
Right. And interestingly, throughout the movie, she keeps longing for ancient Egypt, and we don't really know why this is, and there's a reason for it. But it's funny because this movie, for the bulk of its runtime, is just Ardeth Bey is trying to take advantage of some of the finds from Anaxunamun's tomb to perform some type of ritual. We're not sure what it is. Every once in a while, when someone trips him up, he's got to take him out. But there's a scene where he goes after a museum guard in the dark of in the darkness of the museum after hours. But it's not like, I guess you could say it's kind of horror-esque in that way, but for the most part, it's the trances that he seems to invoke in people from just staring at him with those great eyes, or getting her to be bewitched and practically wanting to go to him, as the professor and the archaeologist have to sort of come to an agreement as to what's actually going on. Not as much of a battle of wits between those two as I would have liked, like you had with Van Helsing and Dracula. Like these friends, like one is very steeped in the pragmatic and the real and the science, and the other's very willing to accept the supernatural. And I thought they could have improved that aspect of the story more, where they both have to kind of come together and just accept what's going on. Instead, they just kind of roll with it. It's like, okay. But but it is entertaining, even though it's not really a horror film. But it is definitely a romance first and a horror movie second, and it's definitely, to your point, Scott, capitalizing on the West's obsession with ancient Egypt that was prevalent ever since Tut's tomb was opened in discovered in 1922, opened in 1923. So, yeah, this is definitely catapulting on that. And let's have there be a curse. Of course, for those who don't know, there was no actual curse on Tut's tomb. It was like a poem talking about how the tomb itself will be obscured and lost for the generations and be safe. And they deliberately misrepresented it as a curse to prompt publicity because they knew that would sell and get more money for more expeditions and stuff like that. But yes. We have some people in the chat commenting on this very thing. Oh, thank you, Eugene Bird. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Eugene. We've got a fluffy dog saying thank you, and no thank you, Eugene. I appreciate your support for the channel. It keeps us coming at you with these hopefully entertaining reviews. I saw that Chief Judge Finity is here. Good to see you, Finity. Thanks for stopping by. And hey, DVB Trip, how you doing, pal? Hello, I'm lost. Has anyone seen My Mummy? DVP says, I haven't seen this flick, but it'd be cool to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah. And it's not like, again, it's only an hour and 15, so there's not a whole heck of a lot to go through. It's more just the stuff that surrounds the production. I would highly recommend it. Like, just because of it being as one of like the golden age of cinema, and they're so well known. That's why I got picked up the box set, is just because I knew it was something that I had to take off my bucket list. But yeah, I would say it's good. Eugene Bird says, I've only seen the Brendan Fraser ones. I have only seen the first two Brendan Fraser ones. I haven't seen the third one, the one with Jet Li.
Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that one, mostly because of the lack of Rachel Weisz, but I do like Maria Bello. So, and Eugene says, in the 1920s, they had the British expeditions and don't know if subsequent deaths inspired the curse mythos or vice versa. I think it's just as Kat sort of laid out there. And yeah, I thought the curse was on the people that disturbed the tomb. Well, basically, if there's a parchment, if there's a roll of papyrus and it says it's cursed, I'd believe it. Just run with it.
I think it was more, if I recall correctly, it was more along the lines that because this tomb is so well hidden that anybody who wastes their time trying to find it will be, enveloped by the desert or lost to the sands of time, like, dive, dehydrate, or whatever. It wasn't really about, and it was, inscribing protections on it. It wasn't really about killing people. It was like the inverse of that. And so when other members of the expedition subsequently died later on of natural causes, which people are like, oh, they're young. It's like, yeah, well, you remember what people's diets were last night, how everybody was, or back then, and how much they were all chain smokers and heavy, binge drinkers. It's, not as big of a surprise, but hell,
18-year-olds were running the country at that point.
Exactly. And there are things in here that are kind of timely and odd. Like, for instance, when Ardith Bey gifts the piece of broken pottery or whatever that describes an Oxuna moon, and the son of Professor Wimple, he's asking, why would you be so generous in giving this to us instead of having your own people and your own guys do it? He says, oh, it's forbidden in Egypt, or we're not legally allowed to do that. Only the foreign Western museums are. And I thought, that's so messed up that we'll let you guys come in and raid it. And there's a hysterical plaque at the British Museum after they excavate Anaxunamun's tomb and bring all the stuff there saying, this is everything from Anaxunamun's unplundered tomb recovered in 1931. And I'm like, well, didn't you plunder it by bringing it all here? It's like you kind of did that.
Yeah. And it's also under British colonial rules. So it's one of those things where you can kind of see this as an allegory to the past coming back to kick out the invaders in a way.
Well, and because
they're entering an area that they're not, familiar with. Like, I can buy people dying, you like Kat mentioned, because of poor diet and health issues, but also this is like early 20s, early 30s. You're going into an area that really, biologically speaking, is not going to be healthy for you. You don't know what you're sniffing. You don't know what you're touching. And if you go by this movie standards, nobody's wearing protective gear, which back then it was very, we'll play it by ear.
Well, and absolutely, yeah. Walking into that air, like I guess it wouldn't be as bad as walking into an asbestos-filled room, but you still got who knows what you're inhaling.
Yeah.
But I found that there was a lot of stuff that was going on because there was the archaeologist who was basically saying, well, we're more interested in the scientific endeavor than trying to get treasures or baubles and stuff. It seemed very protective of sort of the British Archaeological Society. And it's like, no, we're doing this all for the good. But as it has come, as you said, Ernesto, just that maybe when the British colonialism went in, took all this stuff and brought it back to London, maybe that was, plundering.
Yeah,
So,
and hell, 100 years later in real life, I think there was a report, and I think John Oliver covered it, where the British Museum said if we were to return everything that we have back to their rightful cultural locations, we would literally have nothing to
right.
show in our museums. And it's just like, yeah, that kind of tracks because everything in there, you kind of took it and you claimed it, eminent domain in a way.
But that's also like there have been throughout the 20th century, and I know it happened during World War II, just in terms of antiquities that were lost forever because of battles and wars and stuff. And so,
Oh
while I
yeah.
do understand that it is like a colonial, you could consider it a colonial, for lack of a better word, plundering, it actually has provided some protecting value as well.
Oh,
Not to, yeah,
most certainly, of course. Even the dictators at the time, they would find value in a lot of these like locales. They just like claim it at their own. I'm just like, okay, I claim this land and all this riches. And because they claimed it, because they owned it at one point, and because they were of such high stature, just in name only, that can also add to the value of antiquities that really shouldn't cost more than $5, but because some asshole who wanted to rule the world had it in his back pocket for a bit, it's worth millions. If not,
Well,
it's irreplaceable.
and as recently as 10 years ago, when ISIS was starting to, sweep through that region of the world, a lot of those museums started sending some of their stuff over to the British Museum for safekeeping because ISIS was just going through and destroying everything because they're psychos. But
Yep.
once ISIS was defeated, the museums would not return them to
Yep.
Egypt or other places because they're like, if you can't keep a handle on this stuff, it's just going to get steamrolled again next week. Like they literally had to hire like mercenaries to protect the Cairo Museum when ISIS was rolling through there. It was pretty crazy. And so
Yeah.
now they're using that type of stuff as justification for not, returning a lot of the stuff they plundered because, again, a lot of those areas of the world aren't as stable. And it's like, well, if that's what you're doing, you could still do like a co-ownership program then. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
we're holding this for you, but it's actually
There
not.
is a less asshole way of doing it.
Exactly.
Like, don't be so British, be less British.
be less British.
Daniel's not
Daniel.
Yeah, he's not seen this movie yet. Well, I hope you watch it from our review. But piggybacking on what we were just talking about, Eugene Bird says, while scouting a radar site for the United States and Egypt for Operation Bright Star in 1990, I got to see the Giza Pyramid, Sphinx, and the Cairo Tut mask in the museum in Cairo.
Oh, wow.
That is really cool. I saw the Tut mask too. They brought, for the first time, back in 2010, it was like the first time in almost 40 years, they brought it on a global tour or a U.S. tour. A lot of stuff from Tut's tomb came to San Francisco, including the mask. And one of the things they mentioned on the tour, which I didn't know, is that Tut's body has never left the Valley of the Kings. That's the one thing the Egyptian would not let them take. And if they wanted to do any tests on it, you got to bring all your lab's equipment down here. It is not leaving this area, which I thought was quite interesting and nice.
Well, think about it. There are just some things that are that sacred that you really shouldn't like.
Yeah.
For religious and cultural purposes, there are just some things you just leave alone. You want to see it, fine, but you're gonna leave it here. You're gonna come over here. You're not gonna take it. It's ours.
Well, and then to speak to that, when Eugene Bird continues to say, when the Tut mask went on tour in the USA during the 1970s, people lost their shit lining up to see it. Steve Martin wrote a comedic song about it. I'm ashamed to say I love Steve Martin's King Tut song.
Oh, it was like it was like a solid line, like waiting to get in line on a roller coaster throughout the entire exhibit when I was there. and that mask was the last big thing you get to see on the tour, and it is glorious to see that in person. Like, photos don't do it justice. You look at it and it's like, wow, especially when you just won over by just how old the thing is,
there are some things where that it's hyped up in a way, and when you see it and it meets the hype, like I can imagine. I mean, it might not be the same comparison, but it's when I went to the Louvre and saw the Mona Lisa for the first time. The only thing that kind of shocked me seeing it was just how small it was. But even though how small it was, you could see just where I was standing. I'm just like, Jesus Christ, look at the detail on this thing.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. It's good to see Matt G here. Taylor Swift, greater than Disney, Star Wars, and MCU, and Doctor Who. Fantastic. Oh, and of course, Trip. It belongs in a museum. I want to get as many Indiana Jones references as possible. And Eugene Bird says, at the Great Pyramid, I picked up a couple of crumbled rocks on the edge. I tried to climb it, only got up 3 blocks. In the USA, I couldn't even get within half a mile of the Mount Rushmore monument. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's true. I was surprised that they let people kind of climb on the, because I've seen that when, travel documentaries or whatever, and they go there and you see people climbing up on the pyramids. I'm surprised they let them do that, but you're right. They won't let you climb on Mount Rushmore or other things. They want to keep it, preserved. And
I mean, I've seen those blocks. Unless you have a really long arm wingspan, you're not going to make it far.
I have not had the pleasure of going to Egypt as of yet. I
Neither
wonder if it's in the future.
I would love to just, that seems like a trip worth going on.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love the desert, so it'd be great. But yeah, it is. I absolutely agree with you in terms of the love story. I think that it is it's interesting in terms of the love story because what's the lady's name?
Zeta?
Zeta? I think it's.
Or
I
is
think
that
you're right.
Or is that the name of the actress?
Helen Grosvenor.
Okay.
Yes, but played by Zeta.
Okay.
It is a love story and her slow sort of, I guess, realization that she is the reincarnation of Anaxanamun.
Yeah.
But there is a moment where the mummy, Imhotep says, I am going to reveal your memories to you, but you will have no recollection of what I'm about to show you. And shows her the flashback. And apparently there was a bunch of stuff that it was supposed to show her throughout history at different times, like ancient Rome as well, and moving forward through time. And it was ultimately cut. But with that flashback, that was the part that I was just like, oh, now it's scary because of the way that they describe what happened to him. Because she died. He goes to steal the, basically the Book of the Dead, right?
Yeah. Well, the Scroll of Toph, as they call it in this film.
Yes. And so trying to revive her, gets mummified. Well, not even mummified. Gets wrapped up and put.
But it was his own father who sentenced him to that because you desecrated this tomb and trying to do something so sacrilegious and horrible. I condemn you to an unworthy, dishonorable death by mummifying him alive and locking him in a sarcophagus.
Yeah, back then it was an overreaction for sure.
Yeah. But not only that, it was, and this is the part that I was like, holy crap, was the people who buried the unmarked grave where the sarcophagus was, those slaves were killed. The soldiers who killed those slaves were killed because they didn't want anyone to know where it was. And I was like, that's an overreaction. And so and then also, as I mentioned, with the one guy getting run through with the spear, I was like, 1932, this is like, I guess this would have been pre-Hays Code.
Yeah.
So they showed blood, but when we were discussing Dracula, and it was not bloody at all. And I was like, oh, that makes sense because, 30s. But I was surprised with the gore, I guess, 1930s gore that was on display here.
Yeah, I think at that point when he's going through the flashback, that's when it's like that whole sequence, I think to me is the best part because it's like really it's the pacing is very good. It's showing you everything. It's making sense why he's going this far for her. He's showing her like all the sacrifice that went into, you know, it's it's like star-crossed lovers. It's like this is where our love began, and this is how it's gone through the millennium to this moment, and why. And it's almost tragic because the moment he says, everything you're about to see, you're going to forget. It's just like, damn, like, damn
Yeah.
if you do, damn if you don't. Even if you show her everything, she's still not gonna remember it. It's very tragic because he's trying to go back to her, but it almost feels like, I'm doing all this, but part of me is like, it's only worth it just to see you, even if it's one more time.
And to your point, Scotty, when you said it was overkill that they're killing the slaves and then the soldiers, it's the same thing they did with Genghis Khan. And
Oh, really?
that's why nobody knows where he's buried, because nobody came back from burying him. So they might have caved themselves in and then did it. But it's just, I think, or that's some people say that might be true, it might not be, but that's where they probably got that idea for the movie.
Well, the way global warming is going, I'm sure at some point he's going to be unearthed, intentionally or otherwise.
Or otherwise. Hey, Herc 130's here. When I met my wife in North Dakota, we went across the border and I declared the area for my own, then discovered it was just Saskatoon, so I gave it back. Good work, Flyboy. And Tripp says, the researcher Graham Hancock, he climbed up the Great Pyramid illegally when the guards weren't looking. And also, I've heard that the Great Pyramids have never been proven to be an actual tomb because there were no mummies in it. Huh.
Actually, there was evidence that the reason there were no mummies in it was because it was looted. And they found another unofficial entrance that thieves, because the official entrance, you go by the Sphinx, you go underneath and it goes up inside the pyramid. But they found evidence that these thieves or whatever had bored into one of the sides and tried to replace the blocks afterward. And I can't remember what brought about them taking the blocks out to see what was going on, but they bore a tunnel inside and raided whatever was in it. It looks like this probably happened before the pyramid was officially completed, like after they loaded it with all the treasures of the sarcophagus or whatever, but before they had to finish replacing the temporary seal with the real one, and that they'd found evidence left behind that it had been looted. So that's why that
kind of a shame, really. Like,
yeah.
you see what is it? You see artists' interpretations of what it was at the peak of its power and what it is now. It's one of those things where you just see empires fall to the point that people looting it is like, well, this is what we've become, just riches to be plundered.
Well, that's the thing, is all the pyramids used to be covered in white marble and with the gold caps on the top, and those all got looted and stolen and recycled for sometimes for basic things that the city needed for the materials, and they couldn't justify just leaving it, so they stripped them off the pyramids. So
yeah, but it's just one of those things. Like, could you imagine if these things were around and preserved today? Like,
exactly, yeah.
It's a shame, but also if you track down how time and empires rising and falling works, I get it. But it's one of those things I'm just like, could you imagine if none of this was ever plundered, if none of it was ever lost to the sands of time? It just moved on naturally the way things are modern wise, but because of shit that was happening 1,500 years ago, it is what it is. And it explains why we are so fascinated with myth and legends with these type of areas, because it's like it's trying to keep a memory that never was alive and to tell these type of myths just to keep it in people's, keep it in the conversation and not lost to time in a way.
Well, yeah, and it's having it sort of be rediscovered in the early 20th century, it does definitely pique the interest. But I'm with you 100% in terms of wanting to, if only people weren't jerks, if only humanity was on the up and up and it was still available or still left to be as it was originally.
And to Kat's point about ISIS, trying to take out the antiquities to be avoid, broken, damaged, or destroyed. I think it's one of those talking points in the Tom Cruise remake where you see a lot of these, well, let's call them terrorists because that's what we're supposed to perceive them. Like they're shooting at priceless mausoleums as target practice, and those things are invaluable. So yeah, it makes sense that they would kind of move them out of the area because those people just don't have that respect or care about what they are or what they represent.
Eugene says the blocks on the bottom were crumbling and easy to get up. The solid ones were 4 feet or 1.2 meters tall and no footholds. I didn't have enough upper body strength to keep pulling myself up. Well, and once you get up there, you got to get back down. And that's the hard
getting
part.
Getting down is easier than going up.
I don't know. Once you get, I'm afraid of heights. So I would get to the top and be like, oh shit, how am I going to get down?
Maybe you could bring like a 4-foot ladder with you and bring it to climb up each section and just keep carrying the ladder up.
You get those ladders you see in those commercials where they go up and down and change in size.
And BBB says, oh, dang, Eugene, that's still cool that you got to visit in real life. Yeah, it is something that I would like to. I'm envious as well.
We all can't be Hayden Christensen like Jumper and just go to the top and have a Subway sandwich.
Right, exactly. What a deep cut with the Jumper. Fine, that's cool. Herc says, I flew a C-141 out of Rhine, Main, Germany in support of Bright Star, Small World. Huh. And then Eugene says, I flew out of Germany to get to Egypt. If you were hauling a radar from Ramstein, we were in the same flight.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Who knew Germany was so close to Egypt at this point in conversation?
DBB says Genghis Khan went to the future with Bill and Ted. That's why he disappeared. Oh, is that where the body is? That makes sense. That makes sense.
You withheld killing those two in the process.
Eugene Bird says, I was at Lindsay Air Station. Probably was Rhine, Main. Nice.
You two should get together and write a book of your adventures to Egypt. Who knows? You might actually recall a time when you crossed paths and didn't realize it.
Yes, DVB says, yeah, I heard that too, that the pyramids were originally capped with pure gold. Can you imagine what that would look like when the sun catches that?
Oh yeah.
Sunrise or sun. I mean, my God.
It might be a weird reference to make, but if you go with a Roland Emmerich's 10,000 BC, there is a scene where they're trying to haul a gold tip for a pyramid that would later be supposed to be the first mecca of civilization. So I buy it.
Yeah. Huh. And it's crazy because like in the thousands of years since the marble and the gold was looted from the outside of the pyramid, it's like the iconic image that we all have of the pyramids. It's like, oh, nobody would ever dream of trying to restore it or build a replica of what it's supposed to actually look like. Because we're just used to it. Kind of like when you see that life-size replica of the Parthenon in Tennessee, of all places, and it has the accurate colors that it would have originally been, and it seems almost tacky. It's like, wow, this is so bright and pastel-y and weird. But then we're used to seeing the crumbled ruins and how beautiful that even looks by itself.
Yeah. It kind of makes you, in a way, it makes you appreciate just the vision that people had back then for what things needed to look like. Whereas today, the only care, there's no real attention to detail when it comes to design. It's just, can you make it quickly and can you make it cheap? We don't care about how it looks.
Mm.
Well, I just watched a thing recently.
Also, we don't use slaves anymore, so.
No, we pay our slaves. But I just saw something recently about the Museum of Narratives that George Lucas is doing in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And that's there is an aesthetic. There are interesting buildings. They're just fewer and farther between. And it's because of a money thing. You're right. They'll shoot stuff up, just making it functional as opposed to beautiful. But it still occurs it still happens. You could say to a lesser extent when they did what are they called? It's not the World Trade Center anymore. What's the new one called?
Oh, like One World Tower or One World Center or something like that. One World Tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess with those, it's more of an emphasis on glass design than stone and marble. because I think it's more malleable. And I know that some libraries that are built in honor of important people, like the one that Barack Obama built after his presidency, that one has a very unique design, so that one does stand out where it is. Like there will be some situations where some people will have certain monuments or certain buildings made in their name for the community it surrounds. And if you want to leave your stamp on history, you're going to make it look as unique as possible. But in general, like, nothing's going to look like the White House anymore. Nothing is going to be like the Chrysler Building anymore, or the Empire State Building for that matter. Nothing is going to look like anything in Paris or Germany or Spain. Like, those are the last vestiges of how things back in the day looked like versus today, where it's just, oh, we're just going to put a cardboard box over here and hope it stays tall for a bit. We just need it to be cheaper and print it out, roll it.
Speaking of things that are cheaper printed out, I noticed that the opening credits of this movie uses the same music from the beginning of Dracula.
Oh, hell
Yes.
yeah. That was the first thing I noticed.
It's like, oh, what do you know? Because we noted how how Dracula didn't have a film score other than the opening credits, and so it's like, oh, whereas the Mummy has that same thing again with no real score. But strangely, I didn't miss the lack of a score while watching the movie. Did you, Scott? Anybody?
No, I didn't find it, because because we were dealing with the Mummy, and there was sort of a there's a somberness, and he's like, Boris Karloff is so subdued in his performance, and it is very like, it's almost the same thing as Bela Lugosi in terms of the glare and looking at him, and it is something that I think that if I were in the theater at the time, or even if I saw it in a theater now, just the stark silence of the museum. I think there is music when they're at the party.
Oh yeah,
but yeah, and again, it's all diegetic.
Yeah.
I know that it's the same conversation. Oh, what's it? It's the same conversation that we had when we talked about the Mummy, about, the film techniques used back then versus how it would probably play out today. The moment when he opens the casket that he wasn't supposed to open, and he's reading through the document and all the antiquities inside, and then you see in the background Imhotep slowly waking up, like first his eyes open, and then the camera pans down to his arm starting to move. If this was done today, there would be a chilling score, and you would start hearing the bone crunching as his fingers were moving. There would be like a kind of sound when his eyes would open very quickly, and then the more his body starts to move, the more noise it makes. So it wouldn't be like a silent awakening. And then the guy sitting there, unbeknownst that something is happening, he would actually turn around and be like, what the fuck is that noise? And when you look at it, you can see the horror in his face if it was done today.
Yes.
But I do like that it's very realistic, that if you don't hear anything, all of a sudden you see this hand just come out of your right side, and you're just like, oh my God, what the fuck is that?
Well, and it is interesting. Like, I after watching, like, Eugene asked, did the Mummy scare you? No, it unsettled me, but it wasn't. As you said, not jump scares. There's no like cues of music that are like, oh, dun 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 kind of thing. That didn't happen. But there was unnerving stuff and unsettling stuff.
Yeah, I would say it's less scary and more intimidating, because if I were say I was in that scene and it's playing out like real life, I would be intimidated at something staring at me the way Boris Karloff, with all that makeup on, is staring down at you. It's just like, yeah, fuck around and find out. That's basically what that looks like. I'm just like, do you really want to fight me, or do you think I'm not going to kill you just by looking at you?
And then,
oh, sorry, Kat.
No, Gail, finish the point first.
Go. I would just,
Go ahead.
What are we doing?
Go first. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was jumping to the end, and in terms of it being scary, it does become scary from the turn of the love story, because the whole thing is him trying to get to, it's what, Ankes and a moon. I'm never gonna get this right, but at the end, it's like, okay, there's just one more thing we have to do. and he's got his little helper who's like making. Is it gold? What is he making? Is it wax? He's just got like a cauldron that he's stirring, and he's gonna stab her and put her in this molten whatever goo.
Well, it's the embalming.
Oh, okay.
Because he wants to turn her into a mummy.
Right.
But I also noticed that there were certain technical innovations in this movie as well. Like when he's in when Ardeth Bay is inside the museum after hours and he's starting to prepare the ritual, the camera is kind of moving through closer to the floor and kind of curves around the corner to come up behind him. And it's really shaky because this is obviously either it was handheld or something. And I'm like, what is the hell is going on here? And it's like, oh, it's like either a handheld shot because obviously they didn't have Panaglide back then. And so I thought that was kind of innovative and really inventive. How it's just like,
yeah, it was
puts you right there in the action for a minute.
It was a very nervous dolly shot. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
with the quick stream around the corner.
But I think also when you see Imhotep deteriorate back into dust and bone, that technique would later be perfected with the Invisible Man, and it would probably later be used to make the melting face special effects we get to see in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Well, and there, in terms of innovation, yeah, like the director Carl Freund.
Well, it looked like there were crossfades for that, but maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the editing technique would improve after that. Like you can see that this is very rough. It is very experimental, and they're trying to be like kind of like what you said, Scott, when we were discussing the Mummy. It's like, okay, I want this to look this way. I want this to look that way. How can we make it happen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this I meant like with the Raiders face, like when Major Tote's face melts in Raiders, that's like a real practical effect. They just sped up the film. Whereas here, it's like there's a crossfade where you go to him as Ardeth Bay, then they cut in with him with a little more makeup, and eventually they crossfade to just the skull. And
but my point is that it inspired in a way, because it's like, hey, we want to create something like this, but what technique do we have available to us now that could make it look better and seamless? And to the point, with the Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's like, look at how far we've gone in that fading from one look to the other. That one is more seamless. This one is just, okay, I can see what they were going for. It's crude, but I get it.
Yeah. Oh, and again, the innovation for its time as well, absolutely. And it being a leaping off point. But as I mentioned, Carl Freund went on to be hired by. Okay, we've lost Kat, but I'm sure she'll be back. Everybody,
I think
we did. You pissed her off. Way to go. No, but he went on. He was hired by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and he was the one who innovated shooting sitcoms with multiple cameras, allowing for reruns. Because previous to I Love Lucy, you get to see the show twice. It wasn't filmed. It was done live. It was done once for the East Coast and once for the West Coast, and then it was gone forever. And he actually was one of the innovators that helped build essentially Desilu. So it's just an interesting origin story for that. Captain Finity says, to this day, nobody knows what the pyramids were built for. At least the tombs myth was busted. I'm not enough of an Egyptologist to really know what's going on with it. But I thought there were, they've been raided so many times.
Yeah, they didn't find them in there, but it was built in much the same way on the interior, like you do with the annexes in the Valley of the Kings. And given at the time that for who built the pyramids and why for the, like they would do for the grandiose tombs, but it is interesting the way it's kind of laid out, because it obviously took a very long time to build all three of those pyramids. It'd be interesting. So Eugene Bird says it'd be interesting if you could tell us what the first movie with a jump scare was. That is, I don't know that. That's a good question.
I will.
No, that is. What was the first movie with jump scares? Oh, that's a good question. I also don't know.
Huh.
I do like the scene when it's towards the end and he's starting to do like the ritual and he's kneeling down in front of like the pond or whatever that he's got going, and you see the white cat just kind of chilling next to him, like totally disinterested. And my thought was like, oh, it's like Black Phillip at the end of The Witch, where he's just chewing the hay while all the witches are floating in the air. He's just kind of chilling out.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind
If I may answer a previous question about not knowing why the pyramids were built, I mean, don't take this and run with it, but I see, with the Sphinx, the pyramids, like most cultures, when you're at your peak of your power and your riches, you're going to show off in a way.
Oh yeah.
And what better way to show off than to erect the power that you have in personified? And in this case, you could see it as we're just sophisticated, so we have pyramids. Why the shape of a pyramid the way it is? I don't know. It just is. That's how it was designed. Like it could be a tomb. It could be, just to show off how rich they are, how powerful they are. There could also be a religious connotation to it. They were so superstitious of the gods that maybe they built it in their honors. Like, look what we have and look what we built in your name. And then years later, the same gods they worship destroyed it.
There you go. Yeah. Apparently, the first though not intended as a jump scare, was in Citizen Kane, that includes an abrupt wipe transition near the ending of the film and it features a shrieking cockatoo. But according to Orson Welles, it was put in there to wake up the audience near the end of the film. Apparently, 1942's Cat People has an early version of the jump scare, and according to 10 Great Jump Scares of Horror, Carrie in 1976 has one of the first modern jump scares, apparently. So, but I'm gonna, Eugene, I'm gonna keep an eye out for it, and just while we're watching these, because I'm pretty sure.
Well, according to what I looked up, the 1925 Phantom of the Opera has what's considered to be a jump scare.
Oh, okay, that makes sense, because that's the reveal of the Phantom.
And I double checked, and the purpose of the Great Pyramid is that it was the tomb of the pharaoh Khufu and his family, with the two little mausoleums outside, and his granite tomb is still inside, or granite sarcophagus is still inside the pyramid.
Okay.
That was sort of above the ground, and because it was a different type of design, there wasn't a general consensus of what it actually was first, but that seems to be what it is. And because you have the other funerary mausoleums outside the pyramid for other family members, so showing off your power and that kind of thing, and the great of your dynasty built over 27 years.
And so we have here the Washington Memorial.
Yeah.
Big dick energy. Everything's always a show off at some point.
I found it interesting that when
the dead man's seen it. The dead man has seen it, ladies and gentlemen. We have someone in the chat who's seen it.
You always have to open up graves to find a girl to fall in love with.
Hey, love can make you do some really stupid things.
I thought it was funny that he, Ardeth Bey is like, he knows that he can kill people by doing the incantations or whatever when he needs to, and he's worried that she's falling in love with the other, whatever his name is, Wemple or whatever.
The pretty boy.
Yeah, he's worried about that. I'm like, well, then why don't you just, instead of knocking him out or whatever, why don't you just kill him doing the same thing you did to the other guy and just be done with it? But I guess we need him to be the hero, so which he kind of isn't the hero.
Well, it's another case of a son of a doctor who is in love with a girl. But anyway, what was that little? It was that little. I don't like an ankh. There was an Egyptian thing they had put on Helen's door, and when he was, sorry,
an ankh, yes,
yeah. And so when then he goes over to grab it while he's having his chest squeezed again. And I thought that's how he got out of it. Eugene Bird, again, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
You know what? I'll Google anything for you, sir. I will look things up, and I do also want to give shout out to Ernesto for the Phantom of the Opera. That's a really good call. And if you, let's say Eugene Bird says the Burj Khalifa, or however you spell it, looks pretty cool, right?
Yes.
The Mia Khalifa Phantom at some point.
The which?
Aren't you going to be discussing the Phantom at some point?
Phantom of the Opera. We're having Kat, you have the original, like the 1920s one.
I don't have it, but I think I could watch it on. I think it's online for free. And I have to double check.
It should be
And
on
I've got-
Prime also.
And I got the 43 version. So we're just trying to decide which one to do. Or maybe we'll do. Yeah, we'll figure it out. I wonder how
I
long.
think the ending of this movie was unique because you think that, you know, per the way these stories go, you think, like you said, the young guy, fuck it, I'm just gonna look up his name. David Banner. Yeah, Frank. You think that Frank is going to be the one to come and save the day, along with Dr. Moore or whatever. But then it's like, no, she kind of does something unique to get herself out of it. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting because Imhotep expects her to be willing to put up with a bit of a agonizing sacrifice. He's like, oh, it's only temporary. I had to suffer for 3,700 years. But she keeps having this like almost like a dissociative identity thing where she keeps shifting back and forth between her young self as Helen Grosvenor and Anoxina Moon. And Imhotep doesn't really have a way to kill one personality without the other. She's kind of constantly vexing back and forth throughout the movie.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other. You sever one, you sever the other. It has to be a whole. It's kind of like one of those like modern situations in film where there's a thread, something that's binding her like to the real world versus the past, and you're trying to have the one from the past, but in order to do that, you're risking killing the present, and you can't have both. And it's one of those things where after I finished watching the movie, I'm thinking, you know, I'm impressed with how much they took from this movie when they remade it in Stephen Sommers' The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. And it's like, wow, the original laid so much groundwork, and you see it in that remake, but repurposed in a way, especially when he's showing her the past in that pool. But it's a lot of neat stuff.
Yeah, that one by Stephen Sommers even took more from The Mummy's Hand in 1940 because it takes all of those. Some of those kind of redid that. Whereas the Hammer movies and some of the other sequels were just about, you know, the mummy being a monster and, you know, killing people or whatever, which are fun too. I really like the 1959 Hammer one with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee.
It almost feels like the Sommers version is like the marriage of the two eras into one, because you got both the love story and the horror story with a little bit of blockbuster flair to it. It succeeds in all of them, but at least with this original one, just like, I'm impressed that it's just a love story. It's, you know, it's
right, because there's no there's no action. It's not really an adventure movie. No. It's like a romance with, I guess, the hint of horror being the fact that he's willing to, you know, kill whoever he has to, whoever gets in his way, and he doesn't mind, you know, sacrificing this girl, take her, and that kind of stuff. And how he enslaves the butler for at Joseph Wimple's house, the Nubian, as they call him, and he played by Noble Johnson, who was in a lot of movies like that back then. A lot of these horror films, and has him be his servant as they, you know, I like how his whole, you know, Imhotep's whole lair is like inside the museum, and after they know that he's been in there and stealing something before, and afterwards it's like, well, you should know where he's hiding out by now. You shouldn't have to wait for her to go off into another trance, you know.
As we always say, Kat, the plot demands it.
Yes, sort of like when he backs away and he's like, "Oh, your powers are too strong for me." But when they rush towards to try and save her at the end, they don't really have a plan for how they're gonna stop him. They're just like,
nobody brings a gun in this movie.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're gonna go after something that is as powerful as you say it is, bring a fucking gun with you.
Mm.
I mean, with the amount of time it takes for him to choke someone out, or choke their heart out, it's like you should be shooting him while you're at it. Nobody carries a gun in this movie. I'm surprised.
That's true. And here's a DVB says, it's so amazing the quality of movies from the early days of cinema. I definitely got to check this movie out. Yeah, and I actually think the director Carl Freund did a good job on this movie. The only other film he directed, or at least one of the other films he directed, Mad Love, from 1935, the famous one with Peter Lorre. But those are the only two horror films that he made. Because again, The Mummy, even though as we're talking about, this is a romance, but it's categorized, of course, as horror.
And even though
maybe it did feel like a more horrifying story back in 1932 audiences, maybe.
I if I were to put myself in the shoes of people back then, I think all those shots of Boris Karloff staring intently into the camera is what people took away as the most. And maybe that's why it's a scary movie for them, because of that intense stare that he has. Maybe that was it was so imprinted in them that that's maybe what the takeaway was. But I gotta say, even if it's a product of its time and they made him look as best as they could to be a quote unquote mummified individual, and yes, he did go on a 10-year journey, who knows what he was doing to make himself look less of a corpse. I think it's a benefit to the acting from Boris Karloff when he is, talking with Helen, that it, pardon the pun, but it preserves his humanity as you're watching him trying to fight for this love that he knows he cannot have. So I think that's where it kind of like adds more to the love story angle, that you can see the humanity in Emotep, but not because it's the intent, it's because, well, he looks more human than he does a corpse, so it works, it tracks.
Yeah,
you feel bad for the guy, even though he's killed people.
Well, and it is funny because I think that a lot of people's experience will be the Brendan Fraser ones, and I was sort of cribbing from those Brendan Fraser ones in terms of how Imhotep would be able to reconstitute himself, and I was looking at the love story through the prism of the anguish of Arnold Vosloo, and I think that Boris Karloff does a great job in that flashback as well to sell the love. You're right, you do feel for him, but it's unfortunate that part of his plan to maintain his eternal love is, murder.
Yeah,
well,
and
that's
at least yeah.
I was saying that was another one of the overt changes that Stephen Sommers made, that they decided that Imhotep should be more overtly kind of evil from the beginning, and that he and Anaxamun conspired to murder the pharaoh. Whereas here, he was just trying to resurrect her because she died, and it was a lot more tragic because of that. And it's not that he set out to kill, but like if the night watchman didn't disturb him when he was in the museum to see what he was doing and trying to steal things, he wouldn't have killed him. And if Frank didn't get in the way of his desired relationship, he wouldn't have tried to attack him. So it is very much leaning more into a romantic tragedy than it is horror. But you're right, it's Boris Karloff's acting and the makeup and from that 92 years, because again, we gotta remember this is 92 years ago, so that really does help bring the intimidation factor up to make it a creepy, eerie movie.
And the Sommers movies had the benefit of it being, the late 90s, entering the 2000s, using CGI as a tool to bring out, okay, well, if this guy is supposed to reconstitute himself, how are we going to make it look? How can we create something so powerful, so intimidating with the technology you have available? And they're just like, hey, we can actually make it look like a walking corpse, but let's make it juicier in a way.
Yeah, and to your point, Herc130 says, black and white film is the only way to watch something like this. I like the campiness, the special effects. I'm along for the ride with movies of this genre. And follows up by saying, even though they were all in black and white, the cinematography is pretty stunning. Yes.
Oh, hell yeah. That image of Boris Karloff staring you down, that would not work the same way if you were to add color to it.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Because that would be like, do you need moisturizer?
But one of the things that just in terms of, because we watched Dracula, I found the cinematography in Dracula better, just in terms of showing the vistas and the views of Transylvania and whatnot. I found that more wider a scale. And I know that the Egyptian stuff here is okay, but it never had that same, it doesn't have that same grandiose nature. Even when they were doing panning shots of Cairo, I thought that was a matte painting. You know how they do the matte paintings and they put it like on two rollers and they just spin the roller and it goes by. You don't have to move the camera or anything.
Oh, that was awkward. That was very awkward. That transition when we see Helen for the first time, that was like, holy shit, that was terrible. But
there was some good stuff. Like, I'm not saying it wasn't, but to compare it to Dracula, I did prefer the cinematography in Dracula more.
Yeah, here the background of Cairo and the pyramids is an afterthought. The focus is the people, the characters. It's like, okay, we just showed you a picture of the pyramids and Cairo. That's all you need to know. Let's go back
Yeah.
to what we came for.
Hey, everybody, by
like,
the way, it's Egypt.
Yeah, like DVB says, I just watched a few clips from this film, and the quality is pretty amazing, especially for 1932.
They've cleaned up the image a lot, so it's actually pretty impressive. It's like if it were to be even more polished, you might as well be in the same room when it was filmed, minus the color.
Herc130 says CGI equals matte paintings on set. Yes, back in these days.
Or I guess the volume today.
That's true.
Today, yeah.
The volume today is the matte painting of back then.
I like also the matte painting of like the necropolis or whatever that's been excavated at the beginning of the movie that you see a couple times, and it's like you could tell that when Stephen Sommers made his version, he based the look of Hamunaptra and the wide shots on that same exact painting. It looks virtually the same.
It's an homage.
Yeah, it's an homage. So yeah, this movie, it does have a really brisk runtime, 73 minutes, and it's again a romantic tragedy. Not really, but horror back then, of course, because they were on a roll, having done Dracula, and then the Spanish version of Dracula, Frankenstein, The Old Dark House, and now this one. So, very much capitalizing on Boris Karloff's popularity. In the opening credits, he's credited as Karloff, and then put Boris Karloff on his name, because that's how famous he was, even coming off of Frankenstein.
Well, yeah, he was relatively unknown before Frankenstein, and then he basically just exploded from there, right?
Yeah.
It's like the superhero movies of today. Like if you play the role of Batman, your career will skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Universal Monster movies were back then. They were the name to see. Like those were the popular icons back then.
Yeah. Well, and as it has been said mostly by Universal Pictures, is that they basically invented the horror genre or brought it to Hollywood, the monster movies. And because no one had seen anything like it, you're absolutely right. It was the Universal cinematic universe, essentially, which culminated in Abbott and Costello, oddly enough, is where they all come together.
Eugene Bird wants to know, how does it end? Well, for those of you who don't mind spoilers, we'll tell you how the movie ends.
It just ends.
No,
I'm not kidding. It just ends.
Yeah, that's true as well. But he's got, so after all this back and forth, where sometimes she's in the trance, sometimes she's not. He manages to he uses his powers to knock out Frank from afar, so she's able to, in her trance, leave her room and come to the museum. He's going to sacrifice her on the altar, but she keeps, vibing back and forth between her current self, Helene, and the Noxunamun. And she goes over to look at the big statue of Isis that's there in the museum, and she starts praying to Isis and pleading that Isis will save her, because she's thinking in the Noxunamun part of personality, because, again, you can't have one without the other. And then the two guys show up to try and save the day, and they distract Imhotep for a second. And by the time he turns back, they inadvertently bought enough time for her to finish casting the prayer and the spell. So then you see the statue of Isis kind of come to life, raising whatever that that round cartouche cross symbol is that he's holding in his hand, and it shoots out this bolt of almost like lightning that burns the scroll of Toph. And because that scroll is what resurrected Imhotep, once the scroll burns, Imhotep dissolves and crumbles like into dust, because he's the power that resurrected him is no longer a thing. And then she is also free of the spell of being an Noxunamun as well, and is back to normal. And the way the movie just ends, like the camera kind of awkwardly pans down to look at the skull, but the music itself cuts off awkwardly. It doesn't finish. And the camera kind of gyrates when it's looking at the skull and just cuts to black. I was like, wait, what? It's like, It almost felt like something was missing. Like maybe during the restoration, something at the end didn't work. So maybe they deliberately cut it, probably.
Because it's a very old movie.
It is, very old movie. I wouldn't be surprised, because then it just suddenly ends. It's like, oh, we're at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And because it's so, because of when it was released, there are things that I'm like, I don't know if they, can we show a skull? Is that why? Because it's sort of like a slow pan down, and I was expecting to see more like a skull and some bones and some dust, but it just doesn't even stop to linger on it. It just goes past. You're right. There's that jarring just finale, and it is almost this, once we're done with the mummy, the movie is over. If the mummy's dead, we have nowhere else to go. There's no denouement. We don't have to find out what's going on with Helen. It's just like, come back to us, Helen. Come back to us. Does she?
Oh, that's right.
Well, I guess.
Yeah, it's
And the
one of those.
professor's like, here, oh my, and the professor tells Frank, oh my, your love for her, you managed to coax her back across the millennia or whatever.
Yeah.
Bring her back out of the Anox to the Moon personality back to Helen because of Frank's love for her.
Yeah, it's kind of, it in a way it kind of ends the way it begins. Like it just starts with them already opening the sarcophagus where Imhotep is. Like you're missing a first act of a movie. That's why it's so short, because the way it starts. And here it just ends, maybe because of, damage film and they just cut it there, or maybe because of the rating system at the time that's showing a skull on the floor might have been a bit too much. It just ends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because another thing the 1999 Stephen Sommers mummy does is that it has that whole segment of the story where once the Imhotep is resurrected, which is like what, 45 minutes, or 40 minutes, it's quite a ways in. Yeah. That they spend the next half hour or so killing all the people who open the tomb to resurrect his human form, and only then does he pursue the mission to try and kidnap the girl and resurrect his girlfriend. Whereas this just does that awkward 10-year time jump. It's like, where exactly has Imhotep been for the last 10 years? And like, we don't really know. And just immediately jumps into his scheme of trying to, bring Anox to the Moon back from the dead.
And then that is just mostly set up there. You're setting up who the heroes are going to be. You're setting up the importance of the characters you're learning even before seeing the mummified mummy of Imhotep wreaking havoc, people talking about him and talking about the city of the dead as a character that you're not even seeing them, but you're getting the message. That's why even if it takes 40 to 45 minutes to get to it, you're already invested in what they already told you. It's like you're attending a history class while you're getting there.
I love that part of the Sommers version. They do have a fun adventure movie investing in all the characters before he shows up. It's not like you're counting time until
it's got that Zorro golden eye feel to it, where you're in it, you're with it, you're no scene, no shot is wasted. You are invested in everything they're showcasing you.
Yeah.
Well, and I enjoy the Summers one, but it is, if you're gonna say that this is more of a tragic romance than it is a horror movie, I would definitely say that the 99 Mummy is far more of an adventure movie than it is trying to be a horror movie as well. Which is fine, which is great. It does it well.
It's got horror elements, but the focus says, let's make this fun, let's make it pop, and let's make it memorable. And it is memorable.
Yeah, it's an action movie. Yes, hey, Lemon Pie. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Lemon.
Yes, it is me.
Oh, and fun fact: if you do get the Blu-ray, they got an audio commentary here with Rick Baker and Bob Burns, which is pretty cool.
I saw that too.
I wanted to bring up. Can you please show Alex Ross's art?
Oh, yes.
That is a beautiful inspired. It is a beautiful inspired motif because you never see him walking out of the room. You just see his foot and the sleeves of the rags walking away. There, you get a up close like a fly on the wall. That is fantastic.
Yes, and then they put the regular title on the back in the original font, and then inside you just have a lot of images from the film.
Look at the one on the right. Look at the one on the right side. That's beautiful, and that's where the black and white aesthetic works to its advantage.
Yes,
it has that gothic touch to it.
Oh, I'll make Scotty supersized now so you can see what Scotty's got there.
Look at the green.
Look at the green.
Hey, why is it not doing it? Okay, there we go.
Oh, no.
Hey.
Fighting.
Here, you do it. I did it the first time you undid it.
So these are the original posters.
Yeah, you can see them. All these people making soup.
Like,
I know it's a cauldron, but I've got soup on the brain lately.
Fair enough.
Also, that's the most you're gonna get out of a color. Like that's like the Princess Leia of its time with all the Egyptian bikini she's got on. It's got a very pinup girl style to it. Yet very tasteful, I must say, even for back then, to show that much skin and get away with it, that's very tasteful.
Yeah, I was surprised, like you said, they have that and the guy getting speared through the back and out the chest with the blood. I'm like, this is really
Like this movie is pushing boundaries left and right.
yeah.
So I think you probably hit the nail on the head, or at least was closer to the reality of it. That final shot of the remains of Imhotep is more than likely just lost film or something.
Yeah.
Not in terms of, oh no, skulls are spooky.
Yeah. Especially, and the music is just the traditional, universal exit music that they stuff on there at the very end because there was no score in the climax either. But I did like that effect when the Isis statue's arm starts lifting up. So I wasn't sure if that was like if it was going to be a supernatural. I didn't think it was actually going to start moving.
Even for 97 years old, it can still surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the Dead Man says that he saw this last year for the first time and gave it a 7.5. Do you guys have any? How would you rate this? What are we rating it out of? Pumpkins?
Like jack-o'-lanterns or spirits or something. I think
Yeah.
we couldn't make up our minds, but I give this 7 jack-o'-lanterns because I do enjoy the movie.
Yeah,
and I get from our conversation of it pushing boundaries for 1932 and with Karloff's performance and the expression that's why it's hailed higher as a horror film, especially since it was coming off of that, that big role that Universal was having with Dracula and the Frankenstein in the old dark house. So it rolls right into the horror theme. But it is still I think it's still an enjoyable movie today, especially because it has that brisk runtime for it. And it doesn't feel short either. It feels like it's as long as the story really needs to be. So I like
and again, it could have used a little bit of a denouement, but I'm with you on that.
Daniel's Hot Topics gives it a 4, but
really,
I thought you said you haven't seen this, Daniel. You said earlier you hadn't seen the movie, so how are you giving it a 4?
Are you giving the stream a 4? Because I'm gonna take some issue with that, motherfucker.
Okay, yeah, 7 out of 10. Yeah, because here's the thing: like Dracula, it's a drawing room thing, but unlike Dracula, which is like an hour and a half, it's considerably longer and it feels a lot slower in all the drawing room sequences. This one didn't. I thought this was paced very well. I enjoyed it. I like Boris Karloff's performance and the other characters. And yes, it's not, but I already conceded before we started this series that none of these movies are really scary today.
Right.
They're iconic, but this one I also find has decent replay value because I actually enjoy it. And 7 out of 10 average, or if that seems too high, even though it's like a C, I would give it 6.5. Then, if you think that's better for a C, if that makes more sense.
But again, like
or 7. Oh, I see. DVB thought I was going to rate it higher. Why did it lose points? Because it does borrow a lot of the drawing room, some of the drawing room stuff from Dracula, which we just saw in that movie, and we're doing more of the same kind of back and forth with the guys trying to figure out what's going on. We have to stop the monster while it's talking, blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about it like, oh, it's this monster's doing horrible things, even though he's, as we mentioned, it's not really your traditional monster movie. He's just, masquerading as a guy, as a eccentric antiquities guy. And so I enjoy it, but I don't also love, like Frankenstein, when we get to that's going to be a fun ride. Or like Invisible Man is another one I think holds up really well, but this one just doesn't have as much as the iconic horror elements to it because it's not a horror movie. But again, this was marketed as a horror movie. Universal still sells it as a horror movie. So judging it as a horror movie, I would give it trying to keep it in mind from 1932 taste, I would still give it like a 7 out of 10. Because even for 1932, this doesn't really. I read some contemporary reviews from way back then that they even conceded that it wasn't really a movie filled with scares and thought it was okay from that perspective. So I feel comfortable giving that a 7 out of 10.
Yeah. And because of the performance, the ambiance of it, the feel, what I was most afraid of, speaking of horror movie, the thing I was most afraid of when it came to these was that I thought that they were going to be hokey. I thought it was going to be very, almost laughable in terms of the way the performances went, but it is still taken very seriously. People are still doing pretty decent jobs. I I wouldn't say, oh, the acting's bad because they're acting like they're in plays, because they're still at the dawn of filmmaking or even like sound motion pictures. I'm happy with what everybody does and the way that they show off the tension or the suspense. Like I would say that these are more suspenseful than scary. And when something happens, like with when Eugene Bird asked, "When's the first jump scare?" I was watching this, and when the mummy does like rise and leave, which we don't see on screen, we're basically only treated to it by the scream of the idiot lackey. And that was kind of, it's like, holy shit, what was that? It wasn't really a jump scare. It was a response. It was almost like how you have a laugh track on a TV show. It's like, this is the part that's scary. How can you tell? Someone on screen screamed. And it's
And
like,
now
okay,
it quickly morphs to being an actual laugh by that hapless idiot.
yes.
Scream.
Yeah, he shattered his brain. Just like, I mean, as funny as seeing it now, it again, like I said before, that's a pretty legit reaction that someone would just lose their mind just seeing something out of this world happen before their eyes. It's like when you find out you're a comic book character, of course your brain is going to implode. You can't fathom that kind of reality.
So, how many jack-o'-lanterns out of 10 did you give this one, Scott?
Oh, I'm with you, 7.
7? Okay. Senor Momia, what do you give it?
Senor Momia.
Momia. Okay. What do you give it?
Well, I have a much richer taste than both of you, so I'm going to give this a 7 gold scarab beetle out of 10.
Oh, that makes sense. That is good. That is a richer experience.
It's for the same reasons we're giving it here. It's like we acknowledge what it is, we acknowledge what it was, and we were all surprised by what it ended up being. So, yeah, it makes sense.
It's definitely, yes, the Dead Man says more suspenseful than scary. It is a movie which definitely left a lasting legacy with all the different spin-offs and the unrelated trilogy of films that borrows heavily from the 40s, and then the Hammer films of the late 50s and 60s. And I actually do really like the Hammer one in 1959 as much as the co-writer of this one hated it. I thought that was a fun movie. Granted, that's the more traditional mummy going around in bandages going after the people who raided his tomb, but that's still kind of fun for a horror movie, a good Halloween watch. But this is the original, and to your point, Scott, the fact that it's not adapted from a novel, it's like literally commenting on what was popular in the zeitgeist at the time, and they made a story out of that. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And those were also sets that they recreated at that Universal Studios exhibit. That's, I believe, the year-round one that I went to in June 11 years ago, which is, again, so awesome. You get to walk through the old sets of those Universal horror films that they've recreated accurately. And that's really something special.
Let me ask you. Oh, sorry.
Sure. No, go for it.
I mean, I would probably ask this after we go through all the movies that you guys are planning on discussing, but between Dracula and all the inspired sequels and reimaginings and The Mummy and all the sequels and reimaginings, which one do you think succeeded in its legacy?
Like from the onset of the Universal, or from the
with
success
the various
of the remakes?
Yeah, with all the remakes, which one do you think had the more successful run as far as reimagining and remakes and sequels, all that stuff? Which one do you think has like the better foothold as far as quality wise and storytelling?
Honestly, I think this one, The Mummy, because it's even brought back with the Sommers trilogy and the Hammer series of films, which I think was also a trilogy, and then the other Universal trilogy from the 40s. And I know that they did some Dracula movies like Son of Dracula, Bride of Dracula, other things like that. They did the Abbott and Costellos, which overlapped with a lot of the Universal monster movies. So those were like comedies. And The Invisible Man even had a sequel or a spinoff back then. And it's like, okay. The Wolfman, I believe, did as well. But these ones, I think, stand out and I thought they were pretty good. Because on the one hand, there's legacy in terms of everybody remembers these characters. They're super iconic. Yeah. Even Creature from the Black Lagoon had a sequel. A couple of them, if you count The Shape of Water as technically being a sequel.
Yeah, that's true.
Because there's the other one where it gets brought to the United States in a park or whatever like that for that other original sequel. But
yeah, and it's gonna get a new remake from James Wan at some point. They already announced that and in the works.
Yeah, and so I do think The Mummy, because the fact that you could at least pick one movie from each reimagining that was really good, like the Mummy's Hand was pretty good from 1940. The Hammer Mummy movie with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing from 59 I thought was pretty good. And then, of course, The Mummy from the Stephen Sommers movie. And I even liked the sequel, Mummy Returns. I thought that was a fun movie. Granted, those are also more action-adventure, but you're seeing how it's constantly reinventing itself in a way. I know the latest reinvention didn't work, the Tom Cruise Mummy movie, because they tried to turn it into a traditional Tom Cruise action movie, which it's not.
Yeah. I think the one thing that actually worked the most for me with the Tom Cruise one was that first trailer when you see Sofia Boutella as the new mummy, that close-up shot where her eyes, the iris of her eyes are starting to split into four. Like that to me is, and you have that line from Russell Crowe saying, "Welcome to a world of gods and monsters." And it's just, her eyes are separating. I'm just like, ooh, we're into something new. And then when you see it, wow, that trailer really is the only thing that really worked in this dark universe spin-off shit.
Yeah. But, and in terms of successful with its legacy, I would probably go with Frankenstein, simply because Frankenstein has Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. And then I know that they made one for Hammer. They did the Robert De Niro, Kenneth Branagh one, but it never really rises to the original. So just as its legacy unto itself is probably more successful than any of the other ones. And then Dracula, in terms of when the remakes have been more successful, that's what I would go with, just because of Christopher Lee, Monster Squad. The popularity of vampires is basically born out of, if not just the book, then this movie made it mainstream with Dracula. But I am really, really looking forward to going on the ride with Frankenstein.
Well, legacy for this one also, because again, this one's not based on a book, so it's living off the strength of that original film.
That's true.
Did the zombie genre come from The Mummy?
No.
No.
Like no inspiration whatsoever. Zombies just happen on its own in a different way.
I think it was more of a Caribbean Haitian voodoo thing.
Yeah.
It was born out of that. And so I guess there you could say that there are similar feelings, similar tones to it. But the modern zombie movie is basically thanks to George A. Romero.
Okay.
So
it's its own hybrid of things. It's not like, oh, maybe I want to take the Mummy and do something different with it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So
I learned something new today.
Perfect.
Oh, here Time asks, never got through Frankenweenie. Good. Well, I watched the short that Tim Burton did, the black and white short. I thought that was pretty good. I didn't see the feature length version.
I did.
Oh yeah, the animated stop motion one. I think they're both good. It just depends on the first one. Has a very charm, nostalgia to it, and the stop motion one is like, hey kids.
Yeah. And I do want to. Well, are we going to figure out what we're doing next week? You want to go to Frankenstein?
We could do the Frankenstein, and we'll discuss that stuff off camera when we're finished with the show, and what date we'll do it on. And
I'm just trying to tease to our loyal listeners and watchers.
Oh, we've done 1931 and 1932. We could jump back to 1931 now with Frankenstein, and then head to 1935 with Bride of Frankenstein if we want.
Sweet.
Those would be two separate videos, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did, because I'm planning on this myself. I'm curious what you're doing, but Eugene Bird says, I didn't go see Megalopolis today because the review said I was going to walk out halfway through, but thought it might get better. It didn't. Are you going to check out Megalopolis, Kat?
I will probably see it on Monday.
Yeah, I'm probably going to go hit it up on Tuesday, because I've heard it's interminable and boring as all get out, just dull.
Well, Ernesto has seen it.
Oh.
I have. It honestly doesn't take long for you to realize that it's going to be an endurance test 5 minutes to 10 minutes into the movie. It is an endurance test. And it's one of those movies where there is a quote that's narrated, and you can read it on the screen, but it's narrated by Lawrence Fishburne. And 10 minutes into the movie, after that quote comes in, I'm thinking to myself, oh, Francis, oh, you should have stopped while you were ahead. You should have rewritten this thing to the ground before you started filming. God damn it, man.
Here's the big question about Ernesto.
Mhm.
Does it insist upon itself?
Oh, it does. It insists so much that, when I reviewed it, I kind of take a really underhanded slight against Francis Ford Coppola. If you were to read my review in the very end,
I did. I saw that.
where I take the quote that starts the movie and I reword it to pretty much ask a question to Francis Ford Coppola about his, career as it is now. But I will say that if nothing else, your takeaway from this movie is going to be just how Shia LaBeouf understood the assignment given to him, and how Aubrey Plaza understood the assignment given to her. Those two are the standouts of this. Oh my God, this is one of those movies that is going to be more fun to talk about than actually sit through and watch. It was an endurance test for sure, but talking about it now, I'm having a lot of fun picking it apart because it's one of those movies.
And Eugene Bird says we will be here regardless. I didn't even watch Fargo. That's right. So
Series or
that
the
will
movie?
be great. So
The
yeah,
series
we
or the
will be
movie?
back to talk about probably Frankenstein. But yeah, that's the Mummy, 1932.
All right, Scott, do you have your Book of Life ready?
My Book of Life.
Yeah, the Book of the Dead brought this.
Oh, the Book
stream,
of the
and the Book of-
Dead. No, should we burn a scroll or something? Yeah. I guess we'll just say do we have a sign off catchphrase yet or no?
Not really, but
I can help out with that, but if you like.
yes,
Okay,
do it.
we go. But before, and I did this last time, and I forgot, so I don't want to forget this time. But that was good. That was a good rehearsal. Thank you for showing up for rehearsal. But I did want to say thank you to everybody in the chat. I want to say thank you to Finity for being here. DVB, it's always a pleasure. Eugene Bird, thank you again for your continued support. And I don't even mean just in your generosity financially, but also just in coming and hanging out with us. It's a pleasure to see you. Pleasure to have you in the chat. Thank you, Daniel's Hot Topics. Matt G, thank you for swinging by, yo. Herc, I'm glad that you got to regale us with tales of winged adventure. I couldn't fit it in with the Mummy, but I like hearing these things. And I will definitely be going back and checking out the chat on the rerun. Edge of Time, thank you so much for being here, dude. Dead Man, thank you. And I think lemon pie, and I think we're good. I think that is everybody. Thank you guys for being here.
Yes. And I'm Bastet, the god of cats. We have Senor Momia, who's here resurrecting.
Senor Momia, get it right.
We appreciate you coming back from the dead for this review.
Yeah, I got to teach you Spanish, apparently.
Well, I can't read it from back here. It's too. I gotta really get closer. Okay, there it is.
On full screen, then. Jesus.
Well, I can't, because if I go full screen, I won't be able to see the chat.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Did you want to close out with another curse?